Hey, I'm Andy. If you don't know me, it's probably because I'm not famous. But I did start a men's grooming company called Harry's. The idea for Harry's came out of a frustrating experience I had buying razor blades. Most brands were overpriced, overdesigned, and out of touch. At Harry's, our approach is simple. Here's our secret. We make sharp, durable blades and sell them at honest prices for as low as $2 each. We care about quality so much that we do some crazy things, like buy a world-class German blade factory. Obsessing over every detail means we're confident in offering a 100% quality guarantee. Millions of guys have already made the switch to Harry's, so thank you if you're one of them. And if you're not, we hope you give us a try with this special offer. Get a Harry starter set with a 5-blade razor, weighted handle, shave gel, and a travel cover, all for just $3 plus free shipping. Just go to harrys.com and enter code FACE at checkout. That's harrys.com, code FACE. Enjoy.
This is
Make It Plain.
Make It Plain.
M.I.P.
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make It Plain.
Get woke.
Folks, we're happy to have back here with us on Make It Plain. We've not talked in some time. Everything has been so busy. And obviously, we're doing an abbreviated broadcast now in the form of podcast. So we don't do 3 hours a day. So our normal regulars are kind of spaced out now. But he and Media Matters have been stalwart partners, I would even say, of this broadcast, Make It Plain, for a number of years, maybe even at least a decade. That's how time flies. But we're happy to have Media Matters back today, and we're happy to have the president of Media Matters with us, Angelo Carusone. Angelo, welcome back, buddy. How have you been?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, too. Things have gotten no less crazy since the last time we talked, maybe even crazier. Let me ask you this. Trump town hall. Well, no, I was going to ask another one. Because your Media Matters, because everybody's been tweeting about it. What are your thoughts about NBC deciding to give Trump not just equal time, but competing time with Joe Biden? I mean, the boycott NBC hashtag has gone viral from a media critique. What do you think about that?
I think that the issue is, anytime an outlet is enabling, them to sort of break norms, I think it's worth criticism and concern. So, yeah, I think them doing it at town hall would have been fine. But, the circumstances are that it was on a debate night. And it was on a debate night that he backed out of because the commission changed the rules for medical and health reasons. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing about this, is that they did the town hall in person, which frankly probably shouldn't have been doing. I mean, there was a reason why the commission, insisted on doing a virtual town hall instead of an in-person one at this point in time, because of some of the risks and some of the concerns about whether or not he could still be infectious. And I think, one, from a medical misinformation perspective, I have a problem with doing it, because the reason that it happened was that he backed out of doing a virtual debate. So I think that's the narrowest lane for it. I think what they should have done if they wanted to do it was do it earlier, or a different day. Because I think that should be the punishment for blowing up a town hall. And I think at minimum, if they were going to do it, what they should have done was make it virtual. Because all they've basically done, and whether or not the town hall was great and the questions were good, doesn't matter. What they have done, and this is my biggest concern and critique, is that they validated a very important piece of misinformation that he pushes, which is that it's safe to get together. Yeah. And if they want to do the town hall, do it, but make it virtual. Yeah. And watch him, and let's say, because then at least you can expose him as a total hypocrite. But all that they've really done is point out that it was okay for him to be doing the debate in person. And to me, that is, I'm not as henny-penny about as others. And I think if they're going to make the criticism, I think it should be somewhat sound. And to me, that I think is the biggest concern about it. And we all know what's going on there. It is about, it's probably going to have better ratings than the Biden one. And it is about, it's about those ratings and those commercials. And they knew what they were getting.
Yeah. But as we've always discussed, you overrule an ethical line in media when you're just trying to do the profit thing. And even in terms of objectivity, to me, don't you almost chip your hand when you reward one who didn't want to participate in the debate by putting him on? Everything you said is true, the medical contradiction, but you put him on at the precise same time as the one who was willing to participate in the debate and remain above board. I mean, the reason there's a commission is so that both people there's some level of fairness. And of course, Trump blew that up in the first debate too. Yep. But how is it fair and objective to say, okay, well, we're going to put this guy on who was an former employee of ours to compete with the other guy? I mean, honestly, Angelo, what I've been seeing on Twitter, people are like really upset about this.
They should be. And I think that, one thing that this has been happening since Trump started running for office. The press has done more to hurt the institution of press in many ways, the way that they've reacted to the attacks. The second that Donald Trump during the campaign in 2016 banned the Des Moines Register from appearing at any of his events, which is what happened. Mm-hmm. Every single news outlet should have said, we're not coming. You don't ban a news outlet from showing up. But they didn't do that. And then what happened is that problem continued to get worse as time went on, where he was then singling out outlets and refusing to let them participate in press briefings. And none of them stood up. Instead, they did interviews, right? They leveraged that. And that is how the institution has to protect itself. And one of the things that they've done is that they've leveraged some of his attacks on the institution to advantage their own self-interest. And that is very much what's playing out with NBC here. They really shivved the commission. I think ultimately what they did is say that, they rewarded him. He got to have the largest slice of the pie that night, for basically quitting a debate. And never mind that all the right wing said for months, including Trump, was that Biden wasn't going to debate, that he couldn't do it, that he was going to back away, right? Like, so even putting aside that narrative, and probably some comeuppance would deserve there. The reality is that they enabled some really bad behavior. And I think the process that went into that, I don't think is unique here. I think it exposes something much, much deeper and more broken.
Right. And even if it wasn't in a partisan vein, it speaks to something else we've talked about over the years. This need to promote and enable the crazy, the rubbernecking car accident, if it bleeds, it leads. And let's face it, 4 years ago, we had to acknowledge, and some of them did publicly, okay, Trump is going to be good in terms of coverage because everybody's going to want to see what he's doing. So, I was, I guess, somewhat glad to see the debate as, we saw this summer around the George Floyd video. At some point, people were having conversation. At what point is this not appropriate to keep showing on a loop? After a while, you gotta, and people got that, there was some debate and people got to say, you know what, you're right. We're showing this too much. But a tragedy is a tragedy. And Trump is a walking, living, breathing tragedy. And one thing, and the MediaMatt has discussed extensively, his response to QAnon at that town hall, Angelo, was clinical. I don't know what they are. I don't know anything about it, but I do know they're against pedophilia. I mean, so yeah, you do know them, and you have bought into one of their conspiracy theories, which has nothing to do really with ridding the world of pedophilia. I mean, there are real organizations and people who do that.
Yes, there are. Yep.
But nobody on earth has ever implied that QAnon was one of them. They're only concerned about the pedophilia that Hillary Clinton's involved in, which he isn't. So right. That was really if he were on the couch, Angelo, they would have extended the patient appointment.
No, it's true. I mean, people, because it seems so ridiculous, but the QAnon people believe that the reason that all these Democrats, reporters, the media, and parts of the government are these child traffickers is not just because they're sexual sadists, but they say that they're interdimensional demons or psychic vampires. So QAnon says they're eating these children, they're feeding off their energy, that they torment them to harvest energy because they're demons or vampires, psychic vampires. And there's some debate in the Q community, but Trump has retweeted and promoted QAnon accounts more than 250 times in the past few years. 150 of those have happened since April. Just since the debate, the criticism, since the event last night. He took to Twitter late last night, promoted a bunch of prominent QAnon accounts, did it again this morning. He knows what he's doing. It's just like back in 15 and 16 when he would tweet those white genocide people. Occasionally he would use the hashtag. Because he's rallying the most diehard part of his base right now. Because QAnon does have they have a track record of violence. I mean, a QAnon advocate took over the Hoover Dam in 2018 and had an armed standoff with law enforcement because they were trying to get the Department of Justice to release an Inspector General's report that they said was going to expose all of these deep state traffickers. I mean, and that's just one instance. There's tons of them. So he knows what he's doing, and there's no doubt about that. And I actually think partly believes it.
Yeah, well, obviously, he does. The Proud Boys amplification that he's been involved in. I mean, all of that. I guess obviously he's trying to be sure that they're all, well, he said, standing by.
They are.
Well,
oh yeah.
Okay, the New York Post. Now, I rarely give credit to Twitter, but they decided not to allow people to post that story about Hunter Biden.
Yep.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that they, this is an example of, when we think about the tech platforms and everything, it's like, what are the rules? How do they detect violations of the rules? And then how do they enforce them? And the truth is, Twitter, amongst other platforms, actually put that policy in place a couple of years ago about how they were going to handle hacked material. They just haven't had an opportunity to really enforce it. And in this case, they're walking it back a little. I mean, they've clarified this, so you still can't promote the story. But I think that's what you should do, which is that if there's hacked material, especially when it's close to the election, it shouldn't necessarily be just rawly distributed. And I think, so I think broadly, I think it's a good thing. Now, I think there are real concerns about that if it's oversensitized. So, if something is leaked or hacked is a strong word, but sometimes there are whistleblowers that then go through news reports and then they get filtered. There's some degree of sensitivity there, and there's verification involved. Obviously, the Post isn't verifying anything. The article is garbage. It's complete. It doesn't make any sense. It's filled with holes and innuendo, and it's pretty clear that if the material wasn't hacked, it was stolen. And I think that that's not an unfair policy to have when we've already been under assault. And I think the one thing that I would say is it raises a lot of concerns for me. I've so much angst about any of these kinds of moments where we do these very broad restrictions on the ability to distribute information, because I always worry that it always is going to hit the most seemingly unpopular opinions, which is oftentimes social justice advocates and people that are pushing for real change. And it's easy to crack down on them. And I saw it 2 years ago on Facebook. The single biggest purge that they did on Facebook before this latest thing was against a whole bunch of Facebook communities that used to do police monitoring, that would post videos and reports about, and I mean, they purged them all. And because, and no one defended it, right? There wasn't this major outcry because it's, it was considered too sensitive, right? To sort of target the police that way, but they weren't attacking them. They were holding them accountable. So I always worry about that. But I also have to think about the reality that we are in a weird version of a war. It's just information war. We were attacked in 2016 from a foreign intelligence service. It does have an effect. We don't really have strong antibodies in our society to deal with disinformation and misinformation. We just don't. and we have a really loud right-wing echo chamber that's happy to grease the wheels. So I think it can help blunt a story, or at least, even if it doesn't blunt it, what it tells people that could be susceptible to it is this: there's something weird about this. So even if they become aware of it, at least they realize that it's kind of tainted or toxic, or there's something around it. But overall, I think, the right wing is playing games here. They obviously did, it doesn't prove or demonstrate any wrongdoing. I think if it did, I'd feel differently, because sometimes the ends can justify the means for this kind of stuff, right? And if there was really something explosive there, I think, and it was at a different outlet, I don't know, I might feel differently about it. But this is obviously garbage, and it was stolen or hacked. And there's more, which I think is the other thing to keep in mind here. This isn't a one-off. There's actually a series of these releases that are about to happen. So there's something fishy going on. And so it's tough.
So Giuliani, again, is involved in this. One would think that his past involvement might, encourage people not to deal with him. So I guess he's marketing himself now as an October surprise expert. I think, though, when the public has been through this once before, they are going to be a little bit more skeptical. Okay, look at you guys, last minute desperation, Hail Mary on Hunter Biden, who isn't even running for office.
That's right. And I think your reference to Giuliani is really important too, because one of the things to keep in mind here is that the specific substance of this latest revelation, this report, was actually intended to validate or resurrect an attack that Rudy Giuliani had promoted a couple years ago, which is basically that Biden got involved, not just at the behest of his son, to sort of help this executive. Now, none of it is true, and there are so many problems with the story. But the thing to keep in mind is when Giuliani was there doing it, one of the things that he did was actually work with a Ukrainian official to push this Biden smear, and that our own U.S. government says are active Russian agents. So he essentially was, this entire thing, that the same story was a narrative that was fed to Giuliani, that he used as sourcing and promoted and worked with, that from active Russian agents. And I'm not somebody that's always like, oh, Russia's everywhere, but it's like, if you're partnering with somebody that our own government is saying is an active Russian agent, and there's plenty of research and support for that, and this story comes out and it's essentially the same story, I think we should be careful about that. I do. I don't see people crying when we get rid of sock puppet accounts, right, that are tied to foreign governments. People think that's acceptable. No one thinks that's a suppression of free speech, because they realize there's something inauthentic about it. And I think the trouble with disinformation fundamentally is to recognize that I think we have this reflex of all speech is good speech, and I understand that, but that's not true. Actually, not all speech is good speech. There's hate speech, there's harmful speech, and there's also disinformation, which is inauthentic, and it's not protected in the same way, and it shouldn't be. And I think that's what gives me a little bit of comfort. I think that gets lost in a lot of the big parts of this, but I try to stay laser focused on whether or not it is actually inauthentic, and in this case, it is. And I think there should be robust efforts to stop that from being harmful.
So, New York Post is Rupert Murdoch. Yep. You replied to a tweet from the Daily Beast that was quoting him as saying how disgusted he is around Trump's COVID response. But all of these other crazy things, not just the New York Post story, but what we have seen Fox News do for months when it comes to Corona, that's Rupert Murdoch too.
Yes, it is. And I believe, and I think that there will be a real serious repercussion for him and and Lackland over this. I think that when you look at the data and the research on it, there are thousands of instances of COVID misinformation. The pushing of fake cures, pushing it, denying the validity of masks. There are people that were actually harmed. When you start to dig into it, what everyone forgets is very early on, especially in New York, when lockdowns started happening, Fox was pushing the idea that this was Democrats and the media trying to hurt Trump. They were telling people to take vacations, to book trips immediately, to get on cruises, to get on planes that week. And people did it. And there were actually people that died that actually said, wow, I need to do this. I watched Fox. They told me to do this and they got sick. They infected others. And the thing that was so nuts about that is that while Fox was telling everyone to do that publicly, Rupert Murdoch was canceling his birthday party, was quarantining. So while his own network was telling everybody that was bullshit, that they should do whatever they want, that they should actually get out there, he had actually imposed for himself very rigorous protections for his own welfare. And I think this, just like with the phone hacking scandal, that the second there was the tiniest bit of discovery, one phone hack turned into thousands because you were able to get a peek in there. I think what you'll find are internal communications in any discovery process that would show real serious wrongdoing on their part, solely designed for political purposes, right? Why would they lie about it? Because that was prevailing political line at the time. But their own behavior really, I think, puts it in there. And I think when you really dig in, you'll find there are harms. And, the New York Attorney General, she doesn't mess around. There are other states that were harmed by this. It's against the law to disrupt the supply chain for medicines during an emergency. They created a run on hydroxychloroquine in April that really disrupted the supply chain in New York. They messed with studies. They had people appealing to pharmacists, to their doctors, to the governor. They had to put the medication in lockdown. People that had lupus and actually do need it were having difficulty getting it. When you start to unpackage this, it is really serious. And they really created a lot of harms, truly.
But you mentioned that they may either be harmed or held accountable about this. How so? How could this really come back to get them? They've gotten away with so much, Angelo.
I think lawsuits, litigation. And, there was one bogus, lawsuit, it was very flimsy that popped up and out in Washington. It was an organization that sued them, but it wasn't a person. And one of the things that we've been doing a little bit we spent a lot of time in the spring analyzing the legal landscape, and trying to get a sense of what's the cause of action? What is their liability and the risk? The truth is there are people that were actually harmed from this, that took what Fox was saying to heart and acted in ways that ended up getting them sick or others around them sick. The supply chain was disrupted in a clear way, and any investigation will prove it, because they were the only ones promoting hydroxychloroquine even before Trump was. And then they went one step further and actually were targeting New York state officials in a way that Trump didn't. They were actually specifically doing advocacy work. And then third, there were others individually were harmed. That's a little further removed, but there's a reason that they set up a $1 billion fund. And there's a reason why Rupert Murdoch launched a small war room in April to try to disrupt us, because I think that he realized that there was real risk in liability. And I think that's there. And I would say, if you haven't seen the reporting on this yet, one thing that happened after James Murdoch left is he put together a plan to take over the family trust. Once Rupert Murdoch passes away or relinquishes his shares to the trust back, they get distributed, and he would be able to outvote Lackland for control of the company. He's already formed a partnership with his sister. And he's been very public about that. So there's this other thing sort of hanging in the wings, which is an internal fight over control of the company long term, and a lawsuit would have a significant effect on the timeline for that.
That is very interesting. Yeah. That's very, very interesting. Meanwhile, Eric Bolling is going to do some more Corona propaganda via Sinclair Broadcasting. And the fact of the matter is, what some may not realize, a lot of local stations that people watch every day and rely on still primarily for their news, especially an older generation, and Sinclair controls a lot of those stations, right?
193. They're in 100 markets. And in some markets, thankfully that deal with Tribune didn't go through, but in some markets, Sinclair owns 2 of the local stations, and there's a few where they own 3. So they own ABC, CBS, and sometimes in NBC. They really have an enormous amount of influence at because people don't assume it's Fox, right? So you look up at the logo, it's CBS, what you don't realize is that it's actually Sinclair, that they really control the programming. And that's, it's insidious. It is a real concern, both, in this instance, but I also worry about it from an election perspective. It's pretty easy to see how Sinclair could be used to sow chaos or concern about the validity of the election by starting to push a bunch of bogus James O'Keefe videos about ballots being stolen, or to target some local elected officials. So it is always a real risk, truly. And they tried this over the summer with Bowling, where he tried to push that video about how Anthony Fauci created coronavirus. Sinclair initially stood by the report before they aired it, and then eventually pulled it right before broadcast. But they were going to run a full segment that said Anthony Fauci created coronavirus in cahoots with Bill Gates. Bill Gates created it so that he can inject everybody with a vaccine with nanobots. And what was in it for Anthony Fauci was billions of dollars. They said that he created coronavirus so that he could extract billions of dollars because he had made investments. None of it was true. That's what they were going to broadcast. And this is back in April, when we really needed, when there was still that initial flurry of panic and confusion, and he provided some voice of clarity. They were going to just totally mar him at every level. And thankfully they didn't run it, but they're at it again.
So to the extent there's activism around the Fox News channel, there's almost a need, or there is a need, for local activism around some of these baby Fox Sinclair stations, right? It's
true. The one thing that, and it does make a difference actually, because it's local. So it's unlike Fox, where almost all the staff are basically in a mindset, it's not the case with Sinclair. A lot of it is they gobble up these stations that were owned by smaller companies, and the talent's there for a while. So the on-air talent is oftentimes being forced to do these things, and they slowly cycle out. But they're not. There's a lot of them are real journalists and real reporters who are, and the bulk of what they do is mostly fine. It's just Sinclair picks their battles really well. So when there's pressure, they fight back. Sometimes station managers refuse to air must runs. When they hired that Boris Epstein guy, who's that campaign person from Trump, to run these must run segments before the news breaks, there were station managers, because of feedback that they were getting from their own viewers, that were refusing to run these must run segments, that they were resisting it. So there is a lot of value in people even just reaching out to their local Sinclair stations when they see something that's a concern, and pushing back on it, because it empowers the employees. And one tool and a resource, if you don't know what your local Sinclair station is you can go to findsinclair.com, put in your zip code, and it'll tell you where or what your local Sinclair or Sinclair stations are. It's a really easy way to find it out if you don't know.
Findsinclair.com, folks. You definitely should take advantage of that. But most of all, as always, take advantage of MediaMatters.org so you can get the real deal on what's going on with media and a lot about what we're being misled by. Please do. Always a pleasure to have our friend, the president of Media Matters, Angelo Carusone, on Make It Plain with us. Thanks as always, buddy.
Thank you so much.
All right, man. Take care.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, subscribe, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.
Be a barbecue hero with delicious, ultra-low net-carb Hero Bread, buns, and tortillas. Soft and fluffy, high in fiber, and with 0 grams of sugar, up to 10 grams of protein, coming in at under 100 calories per serving. Oh, and did I mention they taste like their mouth-watering traditional versions? I mean, what's not to love? Use code AH10 for 10% off your first Hero Bread purchase at hero.co. That's AH10 for 10% off at hero.co.